You might be surprised that the screen shows a different slide, no? Study on the historical development of the urban form of Cebu City. And there are two names, mine and a person, Johannes Vincent Chua. Um, this is Dr. Chua is also a professor, but if, of the University of the Philippines. We collaborated on a study and presented the paper in UP in a conference, research conference, um, last 2019. I think it was 2019. Okay. Um, so I decided to share this with you because it also serves as background for whatever I'm going to say in the coming lectures, because Cebu City is our like a case study in trying to learn about planning. So, and Cebu has a different kind of problems, and we cannot know or appreciate much about the problem unless we know its history, especially the history of its urban form. Okay, so well, there's an outline. So, like any research presentation, it has to follow this outline. And it's also appropriate for me to share this since we're celebrating the 500 years where when Magellan actually sort of discovered the Philippines for Spain. Um, but in terms of planning, it was more of Miguel Lopez de Legazpi who was more significant in terms of figure, because Magellan actually never was able to establish a settlement when he came. So we also received Christianity. But the history of Cebu during that time is not for me to to recount. You know, I think you already have so much of that with all the celebration, the 500 years going on. What's important is that, okay, so we were under Spain, we were under the US, and then suddenly there was the war, and after the war, for a while we were under the US, and then we took over, we gained independence, and then ever since we never really had a chance, at least Cebu City never really had a chance to, um, or was never really able to plan the city properly. Okay, um, and I say that with a lot of confidence, no, because you can see it. You just look out the window, and then you can see that there's something wrong with the way the city is planned. Okay, in the first place, was it even planned? No? Was it ever even planned? So we will know later on in this presentation. So this is Cebu City at night with the Fantasmania. It looks so beautiful, but during the daytime, that's where you really see that how much it is dense. Okay, so the problem is, of course, about we wanted to know about the historical transformation of the urban form. We have to deal with maps, um, and then pair that up with historical narratives. So from the books, so to understand what the map means. So historical transformation, which means that we have to we'll be looking for patterns in the development of the urban form, and also try to know the historical development in economic, environmental, and socio-cultural aspects. So this study was limited in terms of an area, which is the urban area only of Cebu, not the rural area. And then we're also limited by the availability of old maps. And then the boundaries are not so clear in some barangays. And then there's also an analysis of street and plat patterns involved. So basically, from the old maps, I made a GIS version of the map, and then um, Afterwards, I analyzed the the maps, the GIS version, and analyze the street and plot patterns, and then try to make time different maps for each time period. And then I also study historical accounts, and so that I can determine the changes through time in terms of economic, environmental, and social cultural aspects. Okay, let's go. No? Uh, these are the maps that I had to consider. There were more maps, but I had to choose what can be useful in my study. Okay, what can be translatable to GIS? Because some maps were actually just sketches, some are actually meant for naval navigation, and some other different. No? So I ended up with like 16 maps, but from there I was able to generate a map for this particular time period from 1700 to the year 2000. But skipping some decades, I only end up with like 10. Yes, 10 maps. Okay. So these are the 10 maps. If you can see, it starts at 1700. We only have this for Cebu City or for Cebu. Um, and then now it's this big. Okay. So, and then we have an 1830, 1850, 1817, then the American period, 1900, 1920, 1940, and then during the Philippine independence already 1960, 1980, then year 2000. So 1700, you can see that this part of Cebu, if you don't know where this is, Fort San Pedro is right on the tip here. So the City Hall is somewhere here, Carbon Market is somewhere here. And so there's actually a river that enclosed that development. So this is like an intramuros without the walls, but um, so this is like intra-rio, no? Inside the river instead of intramuros because muros means walls. Much later, so the Spaniards have this policy of segregating different races. So the Chinese were placed on the north side, so this is Parian. And then right across the river, all the Filipinos were placed there. So actually this became San Nicolas, although later on San Nicolas, the boundary receded somewhere even further. Um, so that's why in the history of Cebu, the San Nicolas area was called the um, Ciudad Antigua, no? The ancient city, because for the Filipinos. You can see how developed, uh, how much the development went much later. It is more pronounced in the Chinese area because they are they have more money. Okay, and then there is also that normally the trade would be between Chinese and the Spaniards, and the Filipino and the Spaniards, but um, we cannot avoid Filipinos also doing business with Chinese. So there was actually a road that connected the two communities later on outside of the port area, and this is actually Colon. Okay, Colon Street that connects. That's why for me, Colon is very significant because it connected people aside from actually separating Spaniards from the American development later on. Um, so in this time, 1850, so there used to be a church in Parian, and it was said to be more beautiful than the cathedral because a lot of money were poured into the church because this is the Chinese community anyway. And so the bishop of the cathedral was said to have, uh, well, he had this Parian church destroyed so that the Chinese community will now be going to the cathedral, and well, they say that the money this time will pour into the cathedral. Okay, so here the port opens to world trade, and then if you notice the coast, it changes over time. If you go back to here, so notice that it's only here, no? Because the current comes from the west going to the east. So this becomes silted and expanded so that you actually have more developments there. 1900 is when the Americans took over. And first thing they did is, of course, to put roads to expand to the other parts of Cebu. Okay, so you see here the road going to Guadalupe. And then William Parson, I mentioned him in one of my lectures about the American period heritage resources. So he made a plan for Cebu. It was during this time also in 1910, I think, that we have the Fuente Osmeña, which is the first waterworks system in Cebu. Um, and then there's this big avenue here. It used to be the Jones Avenue. Now, I think this is the Osmeña Boulevard. He made a plan, but it was not followed because when he made the plan, he did it, he drew only on paper and assumed that the whole of Cebu is flat. But some parts of Cebu is actually not flat, but rolling. And so some of the roads that he was contemplating cannot be built. No, this is not possible. So also around this time, there was um, a railway station, oh, train, a train. No? There's a railway that goes from north to south, and then that also goes inside towards Carbon Market. So cool, no? Carbon Market has a train going there. Um, now that they're trying to rehabilitate Carbon Market, they should have placed something like that, no, a train just to sort of recall the old times. Um, 1940 was said to be the golden era of Cebu. That's the year, at least a decade maybe, that Cebu was chartered as a city. And so the Americans were building many things: medical buildings, recreation facilities, museums, libraries. After the war, so Cebu was devastated. I think you've seen a lot of pictures of that. And so the Americans helped put in a lot of money to rehabilitate the city. But the pace of the development was not so fast, no, that people became impatient and tried to develop on their own, to build on their own outside the plans of the government. That's why you're starting to see some portions here which does not seem to be well planned. No? So the government was not able to control that, the extent of the development. Um, so that's what happened here. Uh, the government tried to put, in this case, 1980, a reclamation project in the north, which was too soon. Okay. In fact, until now, this part is not built up. Okay, there's still a lot of land available due to speculations. Um, Unlike the South Reclamation Project, something happened during the 1990s, which was very important. There was a very big storm that hit Cebu that really devastated Cebu. Okay, it was Ruping. I think it was 1990. Um, so after that, I guess that's why I don't have a map of Cebu, because Cebu is not flattable at the time. Um, Everything was really destroyed. Although what destroyed it is simply wind and rain, and not like Tacloban with the storm surge. Okay, but for a couple of months there was no electricity, no water, and so the governor at the time was Lito Osmeña. Um, So he decided to rebuild, and then his battle cry at that time was Sibum. Okay, so that's where the term comes from, if ever you hear about it. No? So, and it was really successful. Cebu became what it became now, which is it's almost like a small Manila, except that the development went so fast that again the government was not able to control people building, building here and there. So it spread. That's why Cebu, the map looks like this now. So it's really topsy turvy. So after having made those maps, in order to to analyze them, you have to break them down into small areas, which I call unit areas of development. So areas of development across time subdivided to form different urban barangays. Okay. Example, at this time, there were three unit areas of development. This is the Spanish, that's the Chinese, and then the Filipino. And then they expanded, but then another area was introduced because these are made up of lutaos or the bajaus, um, and then they're not the same here, so it's not an expansion of B, no? So it's a different one. So they expanded also, and then expanded new communities here and also around, and so forth, no? Until we form this one. Um, because of the pressures of time, so these were these areas were very big. They were not broken down into smaller barangays. So okay, I did not have time that moment. Afterwards, the next thing is to evaluate each of these areas into how to what level of development during that time period. Okay, so that level of development makes use of these transect zones, which came from form-based codes. Okay, form-based codes is something that you will learn probably in planning 2 or 3. Okay, it's another way of planning other than zoning, and it is used also to evaluate existing communities, existing developments, and it's very interesting. Okay, so I'm really into it. Um, anyway, so in that form-based code, there was a categorization of the development into transect zones, depending on how much houses there are and how much streets there are in an area. In the natural T1 zone, which is a natural zone, so there are no houses, no streets. And then you have the rural with maybe one or two, and then just a couple or um, several in suburban, and then you have the general urban and slowly the high rise in the urban core. Okay, so I have to analyze each year. So what happened is, okay, in these are the areas in 1700s, for example. There are only 3 areas, A, B, C, but then um, area A during that time was able to reach until T3, but then the rest are T2. So having done I plotted this in the map. Then it shows like this, no, with the color code. So you can see that A at this time was a T3, but later on it transformed into T4, and much later it became a T5 and remained a T5. Okay, so and then some areas became T6. Um, the area for the plate, the site for the design plate is in K, letter K here. So it is now in urban, how's it? Urban center. Although, as I mentioned, um, I was not able to break this down into barangays. Barangay Talamban would have been more of T4 than T5. Okay, so Talamban would have been like a general urban instead of the urban center. But because most of it is urban center, so like it became colored here. So that's part of my further studies to break this down to even um, to further analyze, no? The development in finer detail. So the factors that led to the expansion of Cebu, one is the incorporation of towns and municipalities into a city of Cebu, because as you can see, Cebu started out very small, but even Parian used to be a different town, but then it was ceded to Cebu. San Nicolas was a different town, it was now attached to Cebu. Even Pardo was a different town before, different municipality. So it became bigger. And like I mentioned also, there were reclamations made, no? Natural reclamation because of siltation, because of the current. So the land area of Cebu grew bigger towards the sea. And there's also the man-made reclamation that started with the North reclamation. Okay, and then now we have the South reclamation. So really, the Cebu expanded more. And then there were periods where Cebu was actually planned. Um, During the Spanish period, also when the Americans with a parson, and then after the war, there was of course the money poured in, the War Rehabilitation Fund, um, and then there was some planning done, and then there's also the post-Ruping. Okay, so after Ruping, when Lito Osmeña rebuilt Cebu, that was also another period of planning, which really ushered in a lot of things, no? Which made Cebu what it is now. And a lot of the planners actually forget about this or does not consider this. So normally planners would think that after the war, there was planning involved and then everything else became neglected. So that was wrong. No? So um, another opportunity to plan happened after the roofing. It always happened after a disaster. No, from Spanish there was the disaster of the war between the Spanish and Americans, and then American there was the war, of course. So that's why we have the post-war period, and then after the post-war period there was the roofing. So it's like if we really want something to be planned, we have to pray for disaster. Okay, so that was the um, presentation we made, which is useful later on when I talk about uh, the next topic and succeeding topics. So we are going to talk about circulation systems. Okay. Um, this is a barangay map. So I mentioned when I asked you to make a site selection project, I mentioned to you that you should be using maps, base maps at the barangay level because they have that, like this one. This is a land use map of Barangay Talamban only. Okay, but instead you were giving me map of the whole Philippines or whole of Cebu, and so the site that you're considering is just really a tiny speck there, no? So it's very funny, but and I hope that you actually follow instructions next time. Um, Here are our site for the design plate is right over here at the top, no? So it's not actually Barangay San Jose, but Barangay Talamban. So I have to correct the documents earlier. And then it's colored brown, and here in the legend, the brown says vacant land. Okay, so but then there's also a zoning map, and it's colored orange, which is residential 2. In contrast, the yellow one here below is residential 1. Now, in my lecture last time, I mentioned that there are residential 1, R1, R2, all the way to R5. And I forgot that I told you that we are only concerned about R1 because I forgot that we have a duplex and row house. Duplexes actually fall under R2 and row houses fall under R1, R3. Okay, so with the right mix of row house and duplex and R1 and um, single detached, so you can have the density required for an R2 development here. But here in the yellow one, I think this is Maria Luisa, so we're not allowed to use R2 or the duplex and much more the row house. Okay, so this is really exclusive, very exclusive. Okay, so in the form-based code, aside from transect level, there's also a a higher categorization, no? A higher level of categorization, which is in terms of region. And the codes they use for form-based code is G4 from O1, O2, then G1 all the way to G4. O meaning open space, and G growth sector, no, 4. And then Talamban, for example, would be uh, here in G3. And then under G3 would be T4. Okay, so it's an intended growth sector. It's already in the periphery of the urban area and then rural area next to it. So it could be between G2 and G3. Um, so there are so residential development is allowed only in from T2 to T6. No, it's not allowed in T1. And well, maybe this is not very useful, but I really just find this cool. So if we are going to design for circulation, our first consideration would be people. Okay, how people travel is by walking. Um, so we have here a standard. I think this is a standard 5-minute walk, which is 1/4 mile. And I think 1/4 mile is something like 200 meters. And then there's also the long standard or the long, uh, I don't know how to say this, no? But it's half a mile. This is 1/4 mile, so this is half a mile. Say, I think this is like 400 meters. Um, and this is normally the standard use for walking towards the say the train station, but we don't have a train station, and Cebu does not have even buses in the city, so this is normally used. Typical walking distance for neighborhood and bus stop catchment areas. So it's like the bus stop or the jeepney stop in our case is the one in the middle, and it should be accessible by people around 1/4 mile radius. Okay, so what is this 1/4 mile radius, 1/2 mile radius? It's the walking distance where people are willing to walk instead of ride. Okay, um, so like for example, you instead of taking the tricycle, you prefer to walk because the distance is relatively near. In general, people find that 5-minute walk is okay. if you are maybe in a smaller community. But if you're in the city, normally they prefer to walk even further. No? I don't know. Maybe it's because there are so many also walking, and most of the time the walkways are shaded, so you can really walk further. And then the walkways, the sidewalk are probably better designed. So that's the same in Japan, for example. You're forced to walk because otherwise you'll be late if you don't walk. You're faster if you walk. Um, and besides, it's a problem. And that's why the apartments which are within this walking distance from a station is more expensive. Okay, um, it's like a trade-off for not having a car because you simply walk. Therefore, when you design communities, it has to be walkable, and these are the standards that we have to follow. But this radius is actually theoretical because the streets are not always straight. Okay, so if you are here, for example, in the middle and you walk this path, so it's straight. So by the time you reach this edge of the red circle, um, that will be maybe 5 minutes. But in some parts, you have to travel, you have to navigate through the streets, and the streets are not always straight. No, for example, you have to go to this part here. You have to go left, go right, and go left again. Um, so by the time it's 5 minutes, you actually reach only some parts before that edge of the red circle. So this is the actual 5 minute walk. So if you're going to um, get all the developed length of the streets and mark off where it ends at, like, say, 200 meters. So that's the edge of the 5 minute walk in reality. Okay, so this green is the actual, and then the red was the theoretical. So if you notice that even in the theoretical, so by the time you reach the edge of the green, that's 5 minutes. So if you want to reach the edge of the red circle, that would become more than 5 minutes. So, uh, which means the theoretical way of planning is only good for, say, the initial. No? Later on, you'll have to refine your studies, and it has to be refined to this actual walking distance. Sometimes the which are nodes are places where people would go to every day. So in this case, it's a park, a transit stop, or a school, or a grocery. And then they can be the one, there are the nodes in the center of the walking distance. And then if they're so near each other, so the whole cluster becomes one, and then they're developed, no, they're developed as this. Um, So, well, here I decided not to talk about this because once you make a cluster, that's the time that you actually plan. Okay, what happens to us is that we have to plan a subdivision because it's like we're forced to do it that way. But if this is a bigger city, so we have to plan it by cluster so that it's manageable. So so this does not apply to the project. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the. Oh, by the way, I told you about walking distance towards a well, walking distance, meaning to say people will not ride a car or a motorized transportation system. But if that goes beyond the walking distance, so people will, of course, choose to ride. And if we apply that in a subdivision, say from the gate all the way to the farthest lot, inside lot, if that is beyond the walking distance, so people are sure to look for a means of transportation other than walking. Um, so this is an exclusive subdivision. Um, we're saying it's a high-end subdivision that we're making. So people have cars, but the people who normally go to the market do not have cars. Okay, so these are the helpers, for example, the kitchen staff and all of those. Yeah. So normally they take public transportation. So you have to consider a public transportation that goes inside the subdivision. Okay, so which means that there are these tricycles um, going in. So it depends on you if you want to put their um, terminal right at your gate, or maybe it can be placed somewhere farther so you don't have to bother with it. Okay. So for cars, before we talk about cars, let's talk about the public realm. Okay, the public realm. So the public realm is anything outside the face of the building. Okay. So, well, this is not a very good illustration because from the face of the building, it's already the sidewalk, the road right of way. So this is really public space. This is open space. But assuming that the sidewalk is instead of a sidewalk, this is the front lawn of this property. So this now is a private property, and also this other side, the sidewalk. No, if we convert that into an up the open space of the or the front lawn of this building, so it's now private property. But even if it's private property, it belongs to the public realm. So anything that can be seen by anyone outside is part of the public realm. Okay, so that's why you will hear a lot of cases when communities would complain about buildings, how they look like, or even about noises coming in from a property, a private property, and they have the right to do so because anything outside the building is part of the public realm. So because it affects them, okay, and the only one that they cannot touch supposedly is what goes inside the building or inside the house. That's why they can even um, protest. They can even complain about how your building looks. Okay. I remember one talk given by an architect who worked abroad, and he said that okay, they were designing this building, and then he used a black material, kind of a black stone for the facade, and then the community complained and actually complained to the government because uh, in that area I don't know what they value, but they were very strongly against black because it's a bad luck. Okay, I think this is a Chinese community. I'm not sure, but the superstition really runs deep in that community. Okay, so it sounds funny, but actually it's very serious now because they actually complained they're going to sue. Now, when it comes to roads, so the type of road depends on the speed of the car and how near you will be towards the destination, which is your house. Okay, so the farther you are from your house and the faster the speed of the car. So we're talking about freeways. Okay, so the roads that are supposed to um, that serves as like contributors of cars are the arterial roads. So there should be only arterial roads connected to the freeway. Okay, so it's really wrong for the freeway to have houses at along the road. Okay, most freeways normally there's no parking going in and out, and then there's no houses. No, um, so the only way to get out of the freeway should be arterial roads. And then the ones feeding the arterial roads are the collector or distributor. And then the ones feeding these collectors and distributors are local roads. Now, in our last lecture, I talked about collector roads, major roads, minor roads, and whatever, no? Motor courts. So we have different terminologies, but we actually talk about the same things. Okay. So for example, in here you can have a major collector and a minor collector, and there can even be a major arterial and minor arterial. So it depends on the country. Okay. For example, here this is in the U.S. They call the roads wide road, medium road, and narrow road. A minor road would be equivalent to a narrow road because the speed is only 20 miles per hour. So this is not 20 kilometers per hour. Um, and then this could be a major road. Um, so this is a good way of showing the roads, which one are major, which are in this case arterial, collector, and local. The red ones are the arterial. Um, so it does not, you do not see a freeway anywhere here. So it's supposed to lead to a freeway. Then you have the secondary streets, collectors, and then you have the semi-private streets. Um, it says here these are cul-de-sacs. No, what are cul-de-sacs? So cul-de-sacs are like dead ends that, well, the tip is like just a roundabout without an island. So it's a rounded street. So this is acceptable only if if you're serving just a few houses and really just to cluster a house, but not to serve as a street going inside and then ending with a cul-de-sac. So that's why it says here that this is discouraged, because what is more preferred is that the streets are all connected. Okay, so that there are many options for going somewhere else. Otherwise, if there are few options and then there's a bottleneck, so it's a big problem. Okay, so the cars at the end cannot go anywhere else; they're forced to stay. So it says here, avoid cul-de-sacs as far as possible. So as much as possible, we connect the streets. Okay. Here is a plot of land which is the same as the one on the left, on the right. And here in the caption, we read, the left is a standard residential land development design with 95 lots that meet the minimum city ordinance requirements for lot size and setback. But the one on the right are curvilinear residential land development design with 98 lots, okay, that reduces street and utilities by 900 feet. Because this, if you notice here, we have actually this one road at the side, and then connecting to it are three roads, one, two, and then another one which actually connects the second street and the cul-de-sac. But here we only have one road connecting that other road here. So therefore, there are fewer uh, uh, lengths, no, in terms of lengths of utilities that you will need compared to this. So you have fewer roads also. That makes it so you actually end up with more properties. So three more properties, so 98 compared to 95. And aside from that, the majority of lot sizes and setbacks exceed the minimum city ordinance requirements. So the plots are actually bigger. So you can see now how efficient it is, no, with the same plot, just because the roads were designed differently. So here you have more lots and bigger lots compared to this one. So, what to avoid when designing? So, intersections should be designed properly. We will talk about that later. And then lots should, the form of the lot should also be designed properly. Then I mentioned this last time when we talk about the different types of lots. The first type of lot that was shown is a lot abutting three streets. I told you that this is very rare because it is really something that planners should avoid. The new access too close to intersection. So if this is the major intersection, the road going um, new access road towards that street should be 50 meters away from that intersection. That's a code requirement. I think it's in the National Building Code. Okay, this is seldom followed. Okay, so in this, let's see whether it's possible here in the subdivision to follow. So what you do is you just try to put the road as far away from the intersection as possible. So a better design is a intersection that forms a T like this, and then that corner lot wider than the interior lots. We'll discuss that later. Utilize T intersection rather than four-way intersections on minor streets. So instead of four-way, so you minimize the streets going to the more major road. If this is a minor road and a major road, so you have fewer streets connecting to it. Everything could be inside. No? And then uh, this one, establish lot lines at right angles to streets or radial to curbs. So your property, the sides of the property, should be at 90 degrees to the road. Okay. So, or if there's a radial configuration, so it should be radial like this. So there's a turn here, so it's radial. So it's not like there's a turn here and then this is going, say, parallel to this. So it it's not a good way to plan. No? So whenever there's a turn and the road is arterial, so the turning radius is bigger compared to a collector or much more the local. Okay, so turning radius for the local is only say 13 meters. And then if you have a T intersection, it's better if it is at 90 degrees. But if it has to slant, somehow it should not be less than 60 degrees. Okay. So therefore, this one is less than 60 degrees, so it's poor. No, you come up with this kind of configuration for a lot, and this is almost not buildable. But if it is something like this is not really 90 degrees, but a bit angled because it bends. But then you have a better configuration for the lots at the corner. If you have a cross intersection, it's not good to offset like this. No, it's actually dangerous. But if you cannot avoid offset, there should be an allowance of 125 meters minimum. Okay, the distance between the offset. But then the best is actually just a through intersection. So, well, what I just want to point out here is that you can also make the street lights a way to improve your how your streets would look like aside from the curb and gutter, sidewalk, park street. Okay, so corner lots should be more than 3 meters more than the interior lots. Why? Because it's in the corner, so you're abutting two streets. Okay, so uh, to give more options, no, in terms of design. And then if you have to design an open, say a green corridor like this, an opening, in this case, there was a green space, green open space because there's a creek. Uh, you should not design it such that the backs of the houses are the ones facing the open area. So like the ones in the picture. Why? Because um, mainly for security reasons. Because here, if you're jogging here, you can actually get mugged or get raped, and no one would see, even if there's a row of house at both sides of that green area. Okay, if you notice, these are already walled so that people do not see inside and people outside do not see. Well, and vice versa. No? So a better design is when the houses actually face the front of the houses actually face the open area. So this is for surveillance. It's a natural surveillance because if there are windows there, people in the open area will naturally be on their toes because at any time someone might be able to um, someone might be looking uh, at them. So this is why surveillance is important in the design. Okay, so in fact here uh, the recommendation is to put the higher density housing fronting an open space. Okay, so this would be your either row houses or the duplex fronting the open space. And then the uh, low density housing, which are the some of them maybe duplex also, or especially the R1, the detached single detached houses. Okay, can be outside. So I think that's the yeah, that's the last of the slides. Um, so after this lecture, I will be uh, posting the a quiz, no? Because I announced that there will be a quiz um, in Canvas. So it's just a 15 item quiz, but with a 20-minute limit, and then one question at a time, but it allows backtracking. Uh, Okay, so our next topic will be open spaces on April 13, next Tuesday. So before I leave, are there any questions? No questions. So, okay, so thank you for your patience. It's almost 11:30. Um, so I'm just going to turn off my camera and we can start leaving. Okay, so goodbye. See you next week.
Thank you, sir.